Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Okay, so this episode, Narancia's Aerosmith is, it's kind of about Narancia's backstory and his continuing fight with Formaggio, and also it also kind of reveals some of his backstory, and kind of also unveils a little bit of lore about why the Hitman team is actually going after Trish. And it's not so much a secret, and it's kind of not so much a that she knows something, but rather that she has an interesting connection to the boss that she hasn't actually realized yet, interestingly enough. It's something that she hasn't actually picked up on, and it's kind of cool. But any case, with the now that in case Narancia has now shrunken so small that his Aerosmith is no longer effective in a fight. And Formaggio knows this and is now making his way to Narancia to actually attack him. And at which point Narancia quickly realizes he needs to hide, and since he's so small, he realizes he needs to actually get somewhere where Formaggio wouldn't think to look. So, and eventually he spies some empty drink bottles that are just lined up at the recycling, and he decides that he can actually make his way over there and actually hide. So he climbs up onto the curb and actually runs to the bottles, and also a cat jumps out and tries to attack Narancia, which Narancia then shoots at it with Aerosmith to chase it off, which hurts the cat, but doesn't like kill it. It's just kind of more of an irritant and deterrent at that point. But in any case, Narancia then successfully makes it to the bottle, hoping that Formaggio won't be able to find it. But then Formaggio actually shows up and pours soda all over the bottles, which causes Narancia to actually fall and slide off. At which point Formaggio actually winds up cornering Narancia, and actually puts Narancia under his foot and tells him that he should really just give up since his little feet has actually made it impossible for Narancia to actually escape, and then proceeds to tell Narancia that he has two options, which is that he can either tell him where his friends are hiding out, or he can just die. And obviously, Narancia admits that he would rather die than tell Formaggio where his friends are hiding, and declares that he's not going to just tell him everything, and proceeds to summon Aerosmith again to actually try and attack Formaggio, which Formaggio obviously intercepts, pointing out that it's not going to work. But it's at this point where we actually do wind up find out Narancia's backstory and how he wound up working for the group, and how he actually wound up working under Bruno. So, as we find out, his mother, who we kind of sort of see in this episode, she dies from an eye infection. So, yeah, that's the thing that's established out of the gate, that she dies from an eye infection. And when Narancia asks his father what happened to his mother is hereditary, his father doesn't give him a response. He just walks off, and Narancia realizing that he's not telling him something about it, realizing that his father has basically lied to him about the fact that he might contract the eye infection one day, proceeds to kind of start ditching school and stops going home, and even starts hanging out with some delinquents, since obviously he doesn't trust. Since obviously after finding out that his father withheld the information that the disease is hereditary, he's not going to eat. That he doesn't actually want to be around his father anymore, and to make matters worse, he just starts ditching school. And even he starts hanging out with one delinquent in particular, who he just calls Bro. But in any case, Bro then remarks about how much he's actually been adapting to the thug life, and also points out that if he wants to actually get some of the ladies, he should actually dye his hair blonde just like him. So Narancia then proceeds to do exactly that, and does proceed to actually dye his hair. But then he's swiftly arrested for a crime he didn't do, and as we slowly find out, also during this sequence, one of the cops actually winds up headbutting him when he refuses to admit to his crime, which actually winds up causing Narancia's eye to become swollen and become infected. But as we find out throughout the entire sequence of Narancia being detained, interrogated for questioning, and then sequentially locked up, we eventually find out that Bro set him up. We find out very, very quickly, and Narancia does eventually piece this together, that Bro actually robbed somebody, committed assault against another person, and then proceeded to make Narancia the fall guy. And eventually, obviously when Narancia eventually gets out, he's a little dumbstruck about the fact that Bro actually wound up betraying him, and to make matters worse, his eye has actually gotten swollen and infected, and it doesn't ever get better. So Narancia starts covering his eye with a bandage, which only prompts people to start spreading rumors about him, which he winds up becoming a little concerned about as well, because as we find out, the rumors are about Narancia's eye infection and about how his mother also died from the eye infection, which Narancia then proceeds to suddenly start to trust Bro even less, as he points out. Bro was the only one who told about the eye infection. But in any case, Bro then proceeds to kind of abandon him, and it's at this point where Narancia actually decides to just start going into a full desperate mode, since as we find out, he's the only one he's more worried about the eye infection than anybody else, because obviously his mother died from the eye infection, and now he presumably has it. So yeah, for that reason, he's very concerned about his life, and realizing he's probably going to die anyway. He starts rooting through the trash and horfing down food, and just kind of living on the streets like a wastrel until eventually Panakatsufugo a much younger Panakatsufugo actually winds up finding Narancia and brings him to Bruno and requests some spaghetti for him. And Bruno, without saying a word, just gives Narancia the spaghetti that he was already eating and had just been served. And Narancia actually starts to respect Bruno because of this, because Bruno doesn't look at him with the hate or contempt that other people normally look at him with, but rather something a little bit more solemn and wholesome. And then compounded to the fact Bruno then proceeds to pay for his eye surgery so that he can actually have the infection fixed. And Narancia is happy about Bruno taking care of him, and Bruno points out that there's no real thanks necessary, but also points out that he needs to start going back to school and needs to return home, which Narancia openly objects to, for obvious reasons, because his father lied to him. But Bruno merely demands that he does it. He doesn't give him much of a choice. He just demands that he does it, or he'll beat the shit out of him. So Narancia then under Bruno's instruction proceeds to actually move back in with his father and starts working his ass off at school. But from that point on, where there is indeed a rift between him and his father, because obviously Narancia disappeared off the face of the earth because he didn't trust his father anymore, because his father lied about the fact that he could potentially develop the eye infection that killed his mother. But in any case, he then proceeds to point out that as he visits his mother's grave, that he does remember the hatred that Bruno heralded him, but he pointed out that it didn't seem to come from a place of contempt or malice, but of genuine concern. And he then proceeds to point out that guys like Bruno are people worth working for. At which point he decides to unknown to anybody else, winds up taking Popol's test before he died, and proceeds to actually develop his stand. It's heavily implied that that's how he actually developed Aerosmith, because obviously, as we established during that arc, Popol's entire test is more so about giving people stands than it is about actually testing their trustworthiness. So yeah, for that reason, Narancia then proceeds to develop a stand. But in any case, back in the present day, shortly after Narancia actually wound up tried to attack Formaggio with his Aerosmith, which didn't wind up working. Formaggio then proceeds to point out why he's actually after the boss's daughter, which is, as he explains, as he actually goes on to explain, and this is actually kind of interesting, is that well, obviously there's a monetary value behind it, pointing out that if they wind up taking out the boss, it'll be billions of dollars worth of drug revenue that they can easily get from that. So obviously anybody would actually jump at that. But more to the point, he points out that Trish actually poses a clue as to how to actually defeat the boss, presumably, because as it turns out, and as Narancia was apparently completely unaware of, as was apparently everybody else, Trish is apparently a stand user, and so is the boss. It's not explained what her stand is, and it's implied that Trish possibly doesn't even know that she has one, since she hasn't used her stand yet, like at all. She hasn't even tried to summon her stand like once, but according to Formaggio, she actually does indeed have a stand. And that she is indeed that if she has a stand, that it could prove a clue as to what the boss's stand actually is. Since obviously their powers would likely be very similar because they're family. So if they wind up figuring out what Trish's stand is, they could likely take a wild guess as to what the boss's stand is as well. But in any case, Formaggio then decides that if Narancia isn't actually going to tell him willingly, since obviously that hasn't worked out so well so far, he actually decides to actually torture the answers out of Narancia instead. And as he says this, he proceeds to pull out a bottle with a spider in it. So yeah, he then proceeds to point out that under normal circumstances, spiders aren't particularly dangerous because obviously everybody's very big. But obviously, if a spider bites you and you're tiny, legit, and this is how it actually kills insects. But the spider will actually paralyze you and then proceed to wrap you up to eat later. So, and then points out that if Narancia doesn't tell him, he'll actually feed him to the spider. And obviously, Narancia isn't very keen about the fact about eating a spider, but realizes he kind of has no choice because, as he demonstrated, Little Feet is more than a match for Aerosmith at the size it currently is. So he kind of has no choice but to just go along with what Formaggio tells him to do, and proceeds to stuff him in the bottle. Although Narancia isn't happy about it, and also completely complains and demands that Formaggio actually let him out of the bottle. But Formaggio refuses until Narancia actually tells him the information he wants to know, and then proceeds to explain in detail about how spiders actually kill their prey. So, or rather, it's not so much that it's going to kill him, but rather it's going to kind of paralyze him, then inject his digestive fluids into him, and then slowly drain him from the inside out. So, which is basically how spiders work. But yeah, at which point Narancia is then forced to actually face off against the spider, which he remarks is a lot faster than he anticipated. But Narancia then proceeds to actually try and fight back against the spider in close quarters, and in the process actually winds up pulling a shard of glass out of his pocket that he swiped at some point. I don't remember because I reviewed that episode ages ago, but he then proceeds to stab the spider in the head, but it's not enough to finish it off, and the spider does eventually sling webs at him and winds up incapacitating him and starts paralyzing him with its venom. With Formaggio then proceeding to gloat about the fact that Narancia has actually been defeated, and points out that if he doesn't hurry up and tell him the information he wants to know, that the spider will eventually kill him, and Narancia isn't going to be able to talk at that point, and then Formaggio is going to be at ground zero. But it's at this point where Formaggio actually notices Narancia's map, and after extracting it with some tweezers from the bottle that Narancia is currently inside, actually discovers Narancia's chicken scratch and quickly realizes that Narancia actually marked the map with directions so that he didn't get lost, and by reverse following the directions is eventually able to actually figure out where Trish and the rest of Team Brute Sharky is actually hiding. And then proceeds to gloat over Narancia, pointing out that now he's kind of redundant, and points out that now that he has the information he needs, he no longer needs Narancia alive, and then proceeds to get ready to leave to actually let Narancia be killed by the spider. But it's at this point where Narancia reveals that Aerosmith's ability to track CO2 emissions isn't limited to people breathing. And then as he reveals, he remarks that during their scuffle, he actually wound up shooting up the car's gas tank. And that's what he was actually aiming at when he attacked Formaggio earlier. He wasn't aiming at Formaggio to try and defeat him. He was trying to punch a bigger hole in the gas tank so that the gas can blew up. And sure enough, as he's saying that, he remarks that it took a little bit longer than he was expecting, but a fire did indeed start inside the car, and Formaggio obviously gets hit full blast with it because he's standing directly next to the car, which causes him to catch on fire, and because he's disoriented, obviously from the fact that he's burning to death, Narancia then proceeds to break out of the jar and proceeds to return to his normal size, and remarks that now that he's normal sized, then a spider bite is the least of his concerns. Since obviously the spider bite only really paralyzed him and almost killed him because he was small, but obviously he's not small anymore, so He then proceeds to point out that Formaggio actually stands no chance and that he's actually done for. But then Formaggio actually winds up pulling out one last trick up his sleeve, pointing out that he shouldn't underestimate his opponent so quickly, and proceeds to slit his own wrist with little feet, and shrink himself, which causes blood to actually splatter everywhere and puts out the fire, covering Formaggio. Which Narancia quickly realizes is a bad thing, and proceeds to actually look around to try and actually figure out where Formaggio has actually hit him. But because of the fire, he actually can't find where Formaggio actually is. So, and Formaggio more or less gloats about this, pointing out that obviously because Narancia set the fire, his ability isn't going to work in tracking him, and now that he's and then remarks that now that he's actually managed to use the cover of Narancia's fire to actually escape. He remarks that now things are going to get a lot more difficult for him and his friends, and this is what the Hitman team actually kind of works for. They actually work to actually do these kinds of things, and remarks that now that they have actually done that, they are going to carry out their assassination with ease. But it's at this point where Narancia both A, realizes that Formaggio is working with the Hitman team from the organization, and B, quickly realizes that he can actually use the fire to his advantage as well, pointing out, and then proceeds to actually blow up the car that Formaggio is actually trying to run to actually hide in, but which winds up causing yet another fire. And obviously, and it's at this point where Narancia actually reveals his plan, which is that if he can't actually track where Formaggio is, because of the fire, that he's just going to cause even more fire and just keep Formaggio from escaping that way. And it works. He actually just winds up bombing out all of the cars in the immediate vicinity, which is bad and definitely destruction of property. And to be fair, this Joestar group this time around, they're kind of organized criminals, so obviously they're not going to be too concerned about personal property. But in any case, Narancia then proceeds to actually successfully destroy all of the cars in the immediate vicinity, which does wind up succeeding in trapping Formaggio, but which Formaggio isn't too happy about, and then proceeds to return back to normal size, and gets up close and personal with Narancia, pointing out that obviously he then proceeds to question whether or not Narancia is actually insane or not, since obviously he just blew up a whole bunch of cars and set fire everywhere. But it's in this point where he then proceeds to point out that he's not going to go down that easily, and since they're in close range, he points out that Little Feet will probably be more than enough to defeat him at this range, and he's probably faster than Narancia's Aerosmith, and they then can proceed to actually go into a draw, where they actually wind up seeing how quickly they can actually pull their stands out and actually attack one another, and Narancia winds up winning the draw, and Formaggio actually winds up dying. So yeah, because of that, as a result of that, Formaggio actually winds up bleeding out, but then proceeds to remark that all Narancia wanted was to actually go on a bit of a shopping trip, and obviously things just got a lot more difficult for him and his friends because of that. And remarks that even if he's dead, the rest of his team is eventually going to come after him, and then with that, he then proceeds to collapse and pass out and presumably succumb to his wounds and die. So yeah, I don't think we actually see Formaggio after this point, because Narancia kind of successfully kills and defeats him, but Narancia then points out that obviously everything is a little bit different, that obviously everything should have gone a lot more smoother than it actually should have, and kind of also subtly implies that he's never going shopping again. So yeah, he then proceeds to actually go back to the vineyard and actually tell everybody what he learned. About how he actually wound up confronting Formaggio and wound up winning, but in the process points out that now some enemies are going to be coming after them, which does wind up upsetting everybody, especially Fugo, who points out that this is exactly why Narancia can't actually be sent out to actually trust anybody, but to be trustworthy. But Giorno actually winds up taking Narancia's side, pointing out that he did with the best of what he could do in that situation, and that he's actually proud of how well he handled it, or at least as best as he could have handled it. And then proceeds to point out that now that they're actually in a position where they're actually a little bit compromised, he then points out that they should probably wait for another order from the boss, since obviously, as Giorno points out, if the boss actually does care about his underlings as much as he thinks they do, that he will eventually send them more instructions and will give them orders on how to actually evacuate and get out safely. Obviously, Abacchio is very confrontational with Giorno, pointing out that that's one hell of a hunch, and that he doesn't think that Giorno will actually have any sort of evidence to actually back that up. But it's at this point where Guido Mista actually reveals that that Bruno actually got an email on his computer from the boss, which winds up backing up Giorno's hunch, obviously. But it's at this point where Guido actually reveals that the boss actually sends everybody emails to, and more specifically the capo, but and remarks that this is the first time that Bucciarati has actually gotten one. So Bruno then proceeds to actually open up his email and discovers that they actually do have a method of actually getting out safely, and that the bosses actually provide one for them in Pompeii National Park, in the Pompeii Historical Park, which he actually wound up hitting it next to one of the landmarks there. I forget which one because I don't know the Pompeii landmarks, but he then proceeds to, but the boss in his email actually tells the group that he actually hit a key for them on the off chance this happens, and that it is a key to a vehicle that will actually get Trish to his location safely. And while the rest of the group actually winds up pondering what exactly the boss meant by his email, Narancia actually puts two and two together and points out that it's likely that the boss is referring to a helicopter, since obviously it's very hard to actually follow somebody in a helicopter. Not impossible considering stands are a thing, but definitely makes it a little bit more difficult for somebody to actually pursue them. But and realizing that they actually do that the possible maybe helicopter is the best chance of actually getting Trish to safety, proceeds to tell Abacchio, Fugo, and Giorno to actually go and get the key and bring it back. Pointing out that if need be, they will actually be in contact with the rest of the group. Presumably the three of them actually just wind up going off to actually go investigate. So this episode actually kind of impacts a couple of things a little bit. Obviously, the big thing is Narancia's backstory, but more interestingly, admittedly from Formaggio, but presumably, and I'm not entirely sure how well we can trust the words of an antagonist here, but it's stated in this episode that Trish has a stand, and based on the fact that she hasn't summoned it, or doesn't even seem to know that she has it, it's possible that she isn't even aware that her stand is a thing. It's possible that she doesn't even know that she has one, much less how to summon it. So yeah, it's possible. It is possible we will actually eventually see Trish's stand if she does indeed have one. Again, this statement has come from the words of an antagonist, from the mouth of an antagonist. So obviously we can't trust it all too much. But if Formaggio is indeed not completely full of shit, then obviously it means that Trish does indeed have a stand and will indeed eventually manifest it at some point. And so yeah, that could be very interesting. Like she just kind of develops her own abilities and comes into her own like halfway through the story or something to actually help the good guys fight. That would be an interesting premise, and I do think that the story might actually build to that, considering that obviously Trish is a very major character at this point. She's kind of just there for the moment, but she is indeed contributing and is indeed a part of the group. So I am interested to see if she does indeed develop a stand, and if so, what it is and what it does. I'm not entirely sure what the stand will actually wind up being, but I'm excited to find out. But in any case, that is my review of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. What did you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out, and you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks. So I'm always saying thanks. So be sure to check this out in the description below as well. Also, be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below. It indeed does help me out. So just be sure to check that out. And also check out my Twitch. I stream every Sunday at 2:30 Eastern Standard Time, so if you want to absolutely help support me that way, then just go check that out and go follow me. It is something that I like doing, and I do want to hope more people will actually watch them. So yeah, just go check that out. Link is just down in the description. Just go see that. But finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent one. It may or may not be this one. whereas the Bond video was a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me, so if you want to try something new, or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But, regardless of whether or not you do any or all of those things, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!